Welcome to Poly Chat with the Wolf Pack. I'm Gray Wolf.
And I am AbiRose.
And in this series, we are going to discuss all things poly. This episode, we're going to focus on something very exciting and new, which is new terminology in the poly lifestyle. In the future, we'll be talking about things like polycules. What else we got?
Well, we've got things like dealing with jealousy and envy, which is one of my favorite topics.
That's a big one. Planning your calendars together. Hierarchies, non-hierarchy relationships.
The primary and core relationship.
Primary and core.
That's important too.
A lot of hot topics that we've had friends of ours come to and say, hey, how do you deal with this situation and what does this really mean? So we thought it'd be a great idea to start this series of podcasts. We are going to begin tonight with a discussion. First, let's introduce ourselves. I am Gray Wolf. AbiRose and I do want to make it clear right now, because it's a big confusion sometimes, that polyamory / poly lifestyle is not the same thing as kink and BDSM. It is not a kink. It is a lifestyle preference and an alternate lifestyle from the monoamory lifestyle. That sounds apologetic, doesn't it?
It does sound a little apologetic, and you don't need to be apologetic.
We are not apologetic. What we are is we are community leaders in the Charlotte area, activists, the LGBTQ, LMNOP, that whole community, as well as the BDSM kink community, and alternate lifestyles in general, trying to promote acceptance and understanding and education.
We do a lot of lectures at various colleges, anywhere from poly, where we like to focus, to LGBT, and as well as BDSM in our lectures, like kink and BDSM. And
now that we've gotten you all excited about that, that's what we're not going to talk about in this series. So, and our favorite thing that we do,
I don't know. What's the favorite thing that we do?
We lead the Wolf Pack, which is a fantastic group of friends that we're very, very intimate with, who are volunteers at our events. They are actually part of our poly family, but they're also just really close, intimate friends.
Yeah, now that's an awesome group of people.
Yes, which we'll discuss a little later how that fits in.
And I just love every one of them.
Yes. So that's us, and that's what we're all about. First, we'd like to discuss the term polyamory, the term polyamorous, where they came from, why we use them today, and actually why we would like to see them replaced with something new. So let's start off with one of my passions, and that is the introduction of new terminology in the world of poly. Now, the term polyamory actually didn't even come on the scene until 1990. It was introduced by an old hippie woman by the name of Morning Glory Ravenheart.
Love those hippies.
Love those hippies. I don't know why I'm laughing at hippie. I mean, hippies are wonderful. We should bring them back. How do we do that? It was brought on the scene by a hippie woman by the name of Morning Glory
Ravenheart.
Ravenheart, thank you.
By the way, that is an awesome name.
It's a freaking awesome name.
It is such an awesome name,
yes.
Morning Glory.
Should we start calling you Morning Glory?
No, but I will name a D&D character after Morning Glory.
Oh,
for
that would
sure.
be clever.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Okay. I have no idea what D&D is. She does. So she's the geek. I'm the freak. So Morning Glory decided that she wanted to define the relationships in her community. She had a communal group living in California, and she wanted to try to define what it meant to be in a coupled relationship with multiple people, in a loving relationship with multiple people. So she came up with the term polyamorous. She combined the Latin amorous with Greek poly, and that's where she came up with polyamorous. And it kind of stuck. In fact, 2 years later, it was first published. She published it actually in her own work back in 1990, but it was actually first used as the word polyamory in 1992.
Well, that was by Jennifer West, who created a Usenet group called alt.polyamory, which I have to admit, I looked at from time to time.
You perv the Usenet groups.
I perv the Usenet groups,
yeah,
yes.
Okay.
Definitely been out there, and there was a lot to see in those Usenet groups,
yes.
by the way.
Yes, I bet there was.
I don't know if I was the first person, but I admit, yes,
yeah.
I was definitely an early adopter.
But AbiRose is also in the computer world. She's very, very into all things computer, so she would actually find an affinity with the Usenet group. But that was the first time. So actually, in 1992, the word polyamory was first published in any way whatsoever. It actually took until 2006 before the Oxford English Dictionary decided to go ahead and use the term polyamory, polyamorous, and polyamorist, and publish them in their dictionary, I guess in a sense, giving them a legitimacy. Yeah, so really it's a very young term. It's only been around less than 30 years, and yet we continue to use the terms polyamorous and polyamory to this day.
Since polyamory seems to be, I guess linguistically not perfect or not correct, is there an alternative that we want to utilize?
It is somewhat linguistically incorrect because when you form words in the English language, I'm going to be a bit of a grammar geek here, but when you form words in the English language, you don't take a root from one historical language and add it to a prefix of another historical language or a suffix or anything to that effect. You always use the same ancient language or the same language to draw your word. Usually you'll take both from Latin, both from Greek, both from Arabic, something to that effect. But you don't combine them. And really, it's polyamory and polyamorous sounds fine, except most people can't seem to spell it. Sounds fine, but it is improper usage. And we found that there's a couple other issues with using the term polyamory and polyamorous. So with polyamory, I can just say that I have multiple loves. Well, if I'm multiamorous, I just use Latin and Latin. Still, I'm saying I have multiple loves. But the term love is somewhat limited.
Well, for one thing, I think it's a little too vague, right? And there's a lot of confusion in the general populace who really don't understand what it is. And it would be a lot more helpful if we had something that can kind of give us more focus.
Yeah, even in a poly lifestyle, there's confusion because you can be with somebody and be very intimate with that person, but not intend to have a future with that person or intend to marry that person or intend to become a life partner with that person. So what's happened is we've actually looked at the term polyamory, and we've looked at the Greek prefix as well as the Latin prefix. And what we found is the Latin would actually be multiamory. Well, I don't know about you, but
multiamory.
Yeah, I'm not crazy about going around telling people, yeah, I'm multi. I feel much better telling people I'm poly than I do telling people I'm multi.
Multi-legged.
Yeah, you're multi what? Poly just has a much cooler sound to it. Well, it's very fortunate that that's the case because not only do the Greeks have the better prefix, because the Greeks have 7 different words for the word love. And each of those words has a distinctly different meaning. For example, the word agapia or agape. The word agape is the word that the Greeks use that would be more of a life partner, marital type of relation, spouses. But
something
also,
like you and I have.
Something like what we have. We have a polyagapian life, polyagapian love. We are intended to be together forever, and we have joined together in that way. That's her little collar, her engagement ring.
I don't wear rings on my hands, so this worked out perfect.
Right? Also a deeper love that you might have for a mother, father, daughter, brother, sister, that sort of a thing, a familial type of a love or a love of your God. Agape is the term that they would use to describe that. Philia, they would use to describe like a brotherly love, a relationship love that you would have maybe to a very close friend or to a community. In that case, they would use the term philia.
So give us some examples of this polyphilia.
So polyphilia, if you were to combine the Greek poly as well as the Greek philia, then you would find a term that would describe the wolf pack, like I mentioned earlier. We're a polyphilia relationship. We're a relationship where we're intimate as friends, more so than just someone that you go out to the pub with or someone that you have your buddy. It's more than just a buddy. It's someone that might be a cuddle buddy. Someone that might be BFF. Someone that you're actually very, very close to, as opposed to someone that would just be someone you're familiar with.
It's like when we all get together like a bunch of wolves and we sit in front of the TV and watch movies and we all cuddle together and just sharing all of our love and energy with each other. That's how I see polyphilia.
Yeah, it's like a friendship with an additional amount of intimacy involved. And that can be placed under the category of polyphilia. And then polyerotica would be a relationship that is sexually and sensually based. You're really not intending to be life partners necessarily, but that doesn't diminish your relationship, and it's not all about sex. There's a sensuality, there's an intimacy involved there, there's a closeness. AbiRose has a polyerotic in life with a lover that is not affiliated with me in any way whatsoever. She's able to distinguish because we use these terms. So there are several different ways that you can express your poly love and be in your poly lifestyles without feeling like you are not legitimately poly. One of the problems that we had with the term polyamory is that people began to describe the polyerotic in couples with a very crude term, polyfuckery. We don't like the term. Polyfuckery is diminishes the relationship. It suggests that all you're doing is playing around and screwing around with somebody. It suggests one night stands, and it suggests a flippant mindset toward
There's
affection.
many times when I'm talking to somebody and I introduce the fact that I'm polyamorous to them, they're like, well, what exactly does that mean? Does it mean you're going out having sex with all these different people or whatnot? And it's tough because now I have to explain, well, no, that's not really it is. Imagine you and your husband, the way you feel about each other, and then just having another person or multiple other people that you feel the same way about each other back and forth. And that's the formation of what we call poly, or currently polyamory. But now with additional words like polyagapia, we can actually focus more about what our poly relationship is like. So when someone who comes around and they just really want to go out and have sex with multiple partners, now they don't have to confuse it with polyamory. We can turn around and use like polyerotica. Let me ask you then, so if polyerotica refers to someone's desire to have some kind of relationship on a sexual basis with others, does that mean they're not necessarily affectionate with them?
I think it's the opposite. I think the affection is the reason why they're poly. The non-affectionate relationships would be the swinging relationships. It really has to do with that intimacy. It really has to do with that desire to have more than just a fun time.
Right.
You care about the person. That's where the love part comes from. You care. Even a friends with benefits would be more of a polyerotic lifestyle than just a sleeping around relationship. There's some intimacy involved. And I think that's really the key to all of these is the idea of relationship.
Building upon something, or building upon some kind of common ground where you can be creating something that's a little longer lasting than just, like a one night stand or something, or a bunch of one night stands.
Yeah, absolutely. Closer, yeah. Intimacy, I think, is really the key term. Well, love in general, I guess, is intimate, but for all of these terms of love that the Greeks have designed.
And of course, with the polyagapia, we're also looking that the other way. Just because you're polyagapian doesn't mean you're not going to be sexual with your partners, or even with others for that matter.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the exciting things about this. In a relationship where you're polyagapian, right now you're polyamorous and you're just poly, and that's why we use the term poly. It just is just poly. But in a polyagapian relationship, you don't have to say that. For example, AbiRose and I have a polyagapian relationship. It doesn't have to just be polyagapian. We can also be polyerotic. She's my best friend, so in a sense, we're also polyphilia. You don't have to define yourself. At the same time, relationships, because in poly, obviously, you have relationships with other people. As a couple, we have a polyagapian relationship. Also has another person with whom she has more of a polyerotic relationship. I have other friends that are more of a polyphilia relationship. So you can actually use the terminology differently with different people.
It's all mix and match.
Right. But the wonderful thing about not using the Latin, which would be multiamory, not only do you get the benefit of all the Greek terms, but calling ourselves multi is sort of weird. But saying poly, you can stick with that. And there's no confusion in the lifestyle. Now you just say, I'm poly, just like we have for years. Our desire is that people will begin using and continue to use the terms polyagapia, polyerotica, and polyphilia to better describe their relationships and therefore give a little bit more depth and meaning to those relationships than just a term polyamory, which seems to just be like a big bucket that you just throw everybody into.
So polyerotica, and I'm not really intending to stick to this word, but it's a good word.
But you're very sexual and sensual, so you quickly are drawn to it.
How does affection take part into this whole polyerotica side of it?
Well, I think the greatest thing about it is you really don't have to say that my relationship, for example, my relationship with AbiRose, I don't have to say my relationship with AbiRose is polyagapian alone. We also have a polyerotic relationship. We also have a polyphilia relationship. We have that, all three of those aspects to our relationship. She's my best friend who I'm very closely intimate with. And yes, we really do enjoy the sensual sexual part. So you can be multiple things with the same person. But what's great is You can be polyagapian with a person and be polyerotican with another person, or polyphilian with another person, or multiple people besides. So
and
you're
that's
not
where
restricted.
the poly comes in.
Yeah, and that's where the poly comes in.
Okay, so in my effort to try to get more involved in the poly community, I hear a lot of terms out there, right? Like poly, a lot of people just say poly and they cut everything short and don't even care about the rest of it. But I hear things like, polycules or polycube or poly. What is it with all these other terms out there that define some kind of a poly relationship?
And I'm kind of excited to get into that in our future sessions. So why don't you describe what polycules are?
So polycules are basically like a slang word that was kind of a play on molecule. In molecules, you have atoms that build up the whole structure of a molecule model, and that's how they kind of see their relationships.
A clever term that's come up. It really has no substance in a root or anything like that. Then you have all these balls connected by all these sticks, and it makes this really incredibly ornate-looking thing to make a molecule.
Very clever.
It is. I think it's incredibly clever. So somebody thought, hey, why not use the term polycule? Essentially what it means is a group of people that are together in a poly relationship, whatever that form may be. They could be polyamory, they could be polyeros, polyerotican, they could be polyphilian, but they're together in this form, and that form is called a polycule.
You mentioned also religions has a lot of instances of it. Most people, I guess, would know the Mormons take on multiple wives. How does that relate to the polyagapia?
Well, the Mormons are a little different because it's more of a restrictive relationship, which is why it's polygamy, which basically just means multiple marriage, married to multiple partners. But their viewpoint is a little bit more strict, obviously, because they're religious-based. They use the term to define marriage relationship, not love relationship. So being in a Mormon marriage does not necessarily mean that the polygamists are actually loving each other or love is even a factor. A lot of the marriages are designed, they're created without love being regarded. That's not to say that people in the Mormon world don't love each other in one of these facets, but that's not the design of it in their religion. Their design is to have multiple marriages, and it's always in a polygamous relationship. With the Mormons, it's always the male dominant, whereas in our world, in polyamory world, and all these other poly things that we're talking about, in our world, it's not based on a male dominant society. There's a lot more egalitarian viewpoints.
With polyagapian relationships, it's more than just 3 people or 4 people, or there's different forms to that too. As you were describing, you and I have our relationship, and then I have another boyfriend off that you know about but don't get involved with, and you bring on other partners as well sometimes. What are these? Do we have words and terminology for these things as well? Or
there are a lot of different ones. They came out with a V, which basically was the relationship that you're talking about, which is you and I and another person. Well, actually, a V is not. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm down here.
Yeah. So the V relationship can mean 2 things. Some people will use that an individual is in relation with someone here, an individual is in relationship with someone here, but these 2 are not in relationship together. And sometimes the bottom of the V is a couple that might be involved in different relationships as well. But then there's W's, there's these weird angles. At some point, we're going to have fun with that. One of our sessions, we have a wonderful little object lesson planned for you. So that'll be exciting. But there are so many different possibilities when you consider that we could be polyamorous, polyagapian, polyphilian, polyerotican as a couple, but we can also have an open relationship as a couple. Or I could just want an open relationship. I'm not interested in having a poly anything with other people. I just want to be able to play with other people. AbiRose is actually polyagapian. She is intimately in love with another person and has another life partnership outside of ours, plus she has a life partnership with me. So she can be poly while I'm mono. She can be poly while I'm open. There's no restriction on how the relationship actually works. And that's what allows it to become this big molecule-looking structure. Did I answer your question?
You did. Very well, thank you.
That's right. 1 for GrayWolf.
That's it. Chalk 1 up. Well, and that's was very fascinating, learning these new terminologies. And I do believe they definitely give us more definition and more depth to our relationships. And hopefully they catch on.
hopefully they'll catch on. So from now on, don't use polyamory and don't use polyamorous. Use polyagapian, polyerotican, or polyphilian. I think it's wonderful that we can continue to use the term poly because it brings us all together. So it's really kind of neat to me that although we're going to break up the word polyamory into 3 different words, polyagapian, polyerotican, and polyphilian, we're actually going to continue to keep us united under the term poly. And I think that's really important because the poly community is growing and getting stronger. Interestingly, though, since 1990, we really just have not evolved at all. It's been the same all this time. And I think we're due for a change, and we're due for some more exploration about what poly can really mean to our society as a whole.
Right. We need some more education, some more marketing around the poly community and start making it a regular, normal, accepted relationship. We
would love to get your feedback on that. We'd love to see what you think about the new terms. And we'd love to hear from all you, I guess there are people out there who are going to champion our cause. And we'd like to really know that we are reaching the poly world for some positive change and for some moving forward. So please leave your comments. Also, if you want to contact AbiRose or I, you can do so through Fet Life or Meetup. We are under GrayWolfSNJ Charlotte, and we look forward to seeing you there as well. Thank you for listening to our first podcast. Hopefully the rest are a lot smoother, and you'll be...
They'll get better as we go along.
They'll get better as we go along. And we have some great topics coming up. Also in comments, you can tell us what topics you're interested in. We'd love to have some new topics. So there we go. We are Gray Wolf.
And I am AbiRose.
Thank you for listening to Poly Chat with the Wolf Pack.